a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. John Carpenter. John Howard Carpenter is an American filmmaker, screenwriter, musician, and composer. Although Carpenter has worked with various film genres, he is associated most commonly with horror, action, and science fiction films of the 1970s and 1980s. Most films of Carpenter's career were initially commercial and critical failures, with the notable exceptions of Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York, and Starman. However, many of Carpenter's films from the 1970s and the 1980s have come to be considered as cult classics, and he has been acknowledged as an influential filmmaker. The cult classics that Carpenter has directed include Dark Star, Assault on Precinct 13, The Thing, Christine, Big Trouble in Little China, Prince of Darkness, They Live, and In the Mouth of Madness. He returned to the Halloween franchise as both composer and executive producer for the horror sequel Halloween. Carpenter is also notable for having composed or co-composed most of his film's music. Some of them are now well known, with the main theme of Halloween being considered a part of popular culture. He won a Saturn Award for Best Music for the film Vampires. Carpenter has released 3 studio albums, titled Lost Themes, Lost Themes 2, and Anthology, Movie Themes 1974, 1998. Early life. Carpenter was born January 16, 1948 in Carthage, New York, the son of Milton Jean and Howard Ralph Carpenter, a music professor. He and his family relocated to Bowling Green, Kentucky during 1953. He was interested in films from an early age, particularly the westerns of Howard Hawks and John Ford, as well as 1950s low-budget horror films, such as The Thing from Another World, and high-budget science fiction like Forbidden Planet, and began filming horror short films with 8mm film even before starting high school. He attended Western Kentucky University, where his father chaired the music department, then transferred to the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts during 1968, but quit to make his first feature film. 1960s, Student Films and Academy Award. In a beginning film course at USC Cinema during 1969, Carpenter wrote and directed an 8-minute short film, Captain Voyeur. The film was rediscovered in the USC archives during 2011 and proved interesting, because it revealed elements that would appear in his later film, Halloween. The next year he collaborated with producer John Longnecker as co-writer, film editor, and music composer for The Resurrection of Bronco Billy, which won an Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film. The short film was enlarged to 35mm, 60 prints were made, and the film was released theatrically by Universal Studios for 2 years in the United States and Canada. 1970s, from student films to theatrical releases. Carpenter's first major film as director, Dark Star, was a science fiction comedy that he wrote with Dan O'Bannon. The film reportedly cost only $60,000 and was difficult to make, as both Carpenter and O'Bannon completed the film by multitasking, with Carpenter doing the musical score as well as the writing, producing and directing, while O'Bannon acted in the film and did the special effects. Carpenter received praise for his ability to make low-budget films. Carpenter's next film was Assault on Precinct 13, a low-budget thriller influenced by the films of Howard Hawks, particularly Rio Bravo. As with Dark Star, Carpenter was responsible for many aspects of the film's creation. He not only wrote, directed and scored it, but also edited the film using the pseudonym, John T. Chance. Carpenter has said that he considers Assault on Precinct 13 to have been his first real film, because it was the first film that he filmed on a schedule. The film was the first time Carpenter worked with Deborah Hill, who played prominently in the making of some of Carpenter's most important films. Carpenter assembled a main cast that consisted of experienced, but relatively obscure actors. The 2 main actors were Austin Stoker, who had appeared previously in science fiction, disaster and blaxploitation films, and Darwin Joston, who had worked primarily for television and had once been Carpenter's next-door neighbor. The film received a critical reassessment in the United States, where it is now generally regarded as one of the best exploitation films of the 1970s. Carpenter both wrote and directed the Lauren Hutton thriller Someone's Watching Me. This television film is the tale of a single, working woman who, soon after arriving in LA, discovers that she is being stalked. Eyes of Laura Mars. A 1978 thriller featuring Faye Dunaway and Tommy Lee Jones and directed by Irvin Kershner was adapted from a spec script titled Eyes, written by John Carpenter, and would become Carpenter's first major studio film of his career. Halloween was a commercial success and helped develop the slasher genre, originally an idea suggested by producer Irwin Yablans, who thought of a film about babysitters being menaced by a stalker. Carpenter took the idea and another suggestion from Yablans that had occurred during Halloween and developed a story. Carpenter said of the basic concept, Halloween night, "It has never been the theme in a film. My idea was to do an old haunted house film." The film was written by Carpenter and Deborah Hill, with Carpenter admitting that the music was inspired by both Dario Argento's Suspiria and William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Carpenter again worked with a relatively small budget, $300,000. The film grossed more than $65 million initially, making it one of the most successful independent films of all time. Carpenter has described Halloween as true crass exploitation. "I decided to make a film I would love to have seen as a kid, full of cheap tricks like a haunted house at a fair where you walk down the corridor and things jump out at you." The film has often been cited as an allegory on the virtue of sexual purity and the danger of casual sex. Although Carpenter has explained that this was not his intent, it has been suggested that I was making some kind of moral statement. Believe me, I'm not. In Halloween, I viewed the characters as simply normal teenagers. In addition to the film's critical and commercial success, Carpenter's self-composed Halloween theme became recognizable apart from the film. During 1979, John Carpenter began what was to be the first of several collaborations with actor Kurt Russell when he directed the television film Elvis. 1980s, continued commercial success. Carpenter followed up the success of Halloween with The Fog, a ghostly revenge tale inspired by horror comics such as Tales from the Crypt and By the Crawling Eye, a 1958 film about monsters hiding in clouds. Completing The Fog was an unusually difficult process for Carpenter. After viewing a rough cut of the film, he was dissatisfied with the result. For the only time in his filmmaking career, he had to devise a way to salvage a nearly finished film that did not meet his standards. In order to make the film more coherent and frightening, Carpenter filmed additional footage that included a number of new scenes. Despite production problems and mostly negative critical reception, The Fog was another commercial success for Carpenter. The film was made on a budget of $1 million, but it grossed over $21 million in the United States alone. Carpenter has said that The Fog is not his favorite film, although he considers it a minor horror classic. Carpenter immediately followed The Fog with a science fiction adventure Escape from New York, featuring several actors that Carpenter had collaborated with or would collaborate with again. As well as several notable actors, it became both commercially successful and critically acclaimed. His next film, The Thing, is notable for its high production values, including innovative special effects by Rob Bottin, special visual effects by matte artist Albert Whitlock, a score by Ennio Morricone and a cast including young actor Kurt Russell, and respected character actors such as Wilford Brimley, Richard Dysart, Charles Hallahan, Keith David, and Richard Masur. The Thing was distributed by Universal Pictures. Although Carpenter's film used the same source material as the 1951 Howard Hawks film, The Thing from Another World, it is more faithful to the John W. Campbell Jr. novella, Who Goes There?, upon which both films were based. Moreover, unlike the Hawks film, The Thing was part of what Carpenter later called his Apocalypse Trilogy, a trio of films with bleak endings for the film's characters. Being a graphic, sinister horror film, it did not appeal to audiences during the summer of 1982, especially when E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which presented a much more light-hearted and family-friendly depiction of alien visitation, was released 2 weeks prior. In an interview, Carpenter stated that ET's release could have been largely responsible for the film's disappointment, as The Thing did not perform well commercially. It was Carpenter's first financial disappointment. During filming of The Thing, Universal offered him the chance to direct Firestarter, based on the novel by Stephen King. Carpenter hired Bill Lancaster and Bill Phillips respectively to adapt the novel into different versions of the screenplay. Carpenter had intended Richard Dreyfuss as Andy McGee, but when The Thing was a financial disappointment, Universal replaced Carpenter with Mark L. Lester. Carpenter's next film, Christine, was the 1983 adaptation of the Stephen King novel of the same name. The story concerns a high school nerd named Arnie Cunningham who buys a junk 1958 Plymouth Fury which turns out to have supernatural powers. As Cunningham restores and rebuilds the car, he becomes unnaturally obsessed with it, with deadly consequences. Christine did respectable business upon its release and was received well by critics. However, Carpenter has been quoted as saying he directed the film because it was the only thing offered to him at the time. Starman was produced by Michael Douglas. The script was well received by Columbia Pictures, which chose it in preference to the script for E.T., and prompted Steven Spielberg to go to Universal Pictures. Douglas chose Carpenter to be the director because of his reputation as an action director who could also convey strong emotion. Starman was reviewed favorably by the Los Angeles Times, New York Times and LA Weekly and described by Carpenter as a film he envisioned as a romantic comedy similar to It Happened One Night Only with a space alien. The film received Oscar and Golden Globe nominations for Jeff Bridges' portrayal of Starman and received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Musical Score for Jack Nitzsche. After the financial failure of his big-budget action comedy Big Trouble in Little China, Carpenter struggled to get films financed. He resumed making lower-budget films such as Prince of Darkness, a film influenced by the BBC series Quatermass. Although some of the films from this time, such as They Live, did develop a cult audience, he never again realized mass-market potential. Carpenter was also offered The Exorcist III during 1989, and met with writer William Peter Blatty during the course of a week. However, the two disagreed about the film's climax and Carpenter refused the project. Blatty directed the film himself a year later. Carpenter said that although they argued about the ending, they had a mutual respect and talked about an interest they both shared, quantum physics. 1990s, commercial decline and Halloween H20, 20 years later. Carpenter's 1990s career is characterized by a number of notable failures. Memoirs of an Invisible Man, Village of the Damned and Escape from LA are examples of films that were critical and financial failures. Also notable from this decade are Body Bags, a television horror anthology film that was made in collaboration with Tobe Hooper. In the Mouth of Madness, yet another Lovecraftian homage, which did not do well either commercially or with critics, but now has a cult following, and Vampires, which featured James Woods as the leader of a band of vampire hunters in league with the Catholic Church. John Carpenter was originally in consideration to be the director for the Halloween sequel project, Halloween H20, 20 years later. Since Jamie Lee Curtis, the main actress from the original and the sequel Halloween 2, wanted to reunite the cast and crew of the original film, she asked Carpenter to direct Halloween H20, 20 years later. Carpenter agreed to direct the film, but his starting fee as director was $10 million. Carpenter rationalized this by believing the hefty fee was compensation for revenue he never received from the original Halloween, a matter that was still a contention between Carpenter and Halloween producer Mustafa Akkad even after 20 years. When Akkad balked at Carpenter's fee, Carpenter quit the project. Steve Miner assumed directing of Halloween H20, 20 years later, which was a success and received generally favorable reviews. During 1998, Carpenter composed the soundtrack for the video game Sentinel Returns, published for PC and PlayStation. 2000s, semi-retirement. In 2001, the film Ghosts of Mars was released. During 2005 there were remakes of Assault on Precinct 13 and The Fog, the latter being produced by Carpenter himself, though in an interview he defined his involvement as, "I come in and say hello to everybody. Go home." During 2007 Rob Zombie produced and directed Halloween, a reimagining of Carpenter's 1978 film that resulted in a sequel 2 years later. Carpenter worked as director during 2005 for an episode of Showtime's Masters of Horror television series as one of the 13 filmmakers involved in the first season. His episode, Cigarette Burns, received generally positive reviews and positive reactions from Carpenter fans, many of whom regard it as on par with his earlier horror classics. He has since contributed another original episode for the show's second season entitled Pro-Life, about a young girl who is raped and impregnated by a demon and wants to have an abortion, but whose efforts are halted by her religious fanatic, gun-toting father and her 3 brothers. 2010's The Ward focus on music and return to Halloween. The Ward, Carpenter's first film since 2001's Ghosts of Mars, premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival on September 13, 2010. Carpenter narrated the video game FEAR 3, while also consulting on its storyline. On October 10, 2010, Carpenter received the Lifetime Award from the Freak Show Horror Film Festival. Test footage from the set of Dark Ilda emerged in July 2010 and on October 31, 2010. It was announced Carpenter will direct. On February 3, 2015, the indie label Sacred Bones Records released his album Lost Themes. On October 19, 2015, All Tomorrow's Parties announced that Carpenter will be performing old and new compositions in London and Manchester, England. During February 2016, Carpenter announced a sequel to Lost Themes titled Lost Themes 2, which was released on April 15, 2016. He then released his third studio album, titled Anthology, Movie Themes 1974-1998 on October 20, 2017. On May 23, 2016, it was announced that Carpenter would act as executive producer on a new film in the Halloween film series, titled Halloween, planned for an October 2018 release. The film acts as a direct sequel to Carpenter's original film, ignoring the continuity of all other previous films. It is his first direct involvement with the franchise since 1982's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Techniques. Carpenter's films are characterized by minimalist lighting and photography, static cameras, use of Steadicam, and distinctive synthesized scores. With the exception of Someone's Watching Me, Elvis, The Thing, Starman, Memoirs of an Invisible Man, and The Ward, he has scored all of his films, most famously the themes from Halloween and Assault on Precinct 13. His music is generally synthesized with accompaniment from piano and atmospherics. Carpenter is an outspoken proponent of widescreen filming, and all of his theatrical films were filmed anamorphic with a 2.35:1 or greater aspect ratio. The Ward was filmed in Super 35. The first time Carpenter has ever used that system. Carpenter has stated he feels that the 35mm Panavision anamorphic format is the best movie system there is, preferring it to both digital and 3D film. Film music and solo records. For a recent interview, Carpenter stated that it was his father's work as a music teacher which first sparked an interest in him to make music. This interest was to play a major role in his later career. He composed the music to most of his films, and the soundtrack to many of those became cult items for record collectors. A 21st century revival of his music is due in no small amount to the Death Waltz record company, which reissued several of his soundtracks, including Escape from New York, Halloween 2, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, Assault on Precinct 13, They Live, Prince of Darkness and The Fog. Carpenter was an early adopter of synthesizers, since his film debut Dark Star, when he used a EMS VCS-3 synth. His soundtracks went on to influence electronic artists who followed, but Carpenter himself admitted he had no particular interest in synthesizers other than that they provided a means to sound big with just a keyboard. For many years he worked in partnership with musician Alan Howarth, who would realize his vision by working on the more technical aspects of recording, allowing Carpenter to focus on writing the music. The renewed interest in John Carpenter's music thanks to the Death Waltz reissues and Lost Themes albums caused him to, for the first time ever, tour as a musician. As of 2016, Carpenter was more involved with his music career than filmmaking, though during May of that same year it was announced he would be involved with the new Halloween film. Carpenter has also contributed an opening narration for the retro 1980s synthwave band Gunship, for their track entitled Tech Noir. The narration is in line with Carpenter's earlier work on apocalyptic themes. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like